VR games, despite their looks, are pretty demanding, and this is due to having to render the game twice at a pretty high resolution. Most modern graphics cards still struggle with those games, especially since we need them to run at least 120 FPS. But what about our graphics cards? Surely they wouldn't even launch those games, right? Well, my graphics card died recently and my temporary replacement was a GTX 560 Ti. Despite its age and lack of driver support, this card does okay in most traditional games. But what about VR? Well, honestly, it's not too bad, and it could even be better than what I am about to show, as I have found a weird bug last minute with overlays that drop frame rates very heavily. But before playing games, I had to set up Oculus Link, and I quickly gave up on that because my driver were too old. At this point, I already knew what my alternative was going to be, and it is ALVR. ALVR is a free alternative to Oculus's software and a virtual desktop. It works both wirelessly and wired, and allows you to use CPU encoding, and that's what I had to use due to my lack of iGPU and GPU encoder. Encoding on the CPU was pretty demanding and I had to mess with a lot of settings, but once I found something good, I could start testing. And I'm gonna start with assetto corsa, because looking at the frame rate reported by Steam, the game is running at over 80 FPS, but the video isn't very smooth. I will show an example with the chart later, but removing Steam's overlay makes the game run as smooth as reported. So this one will be a redo in the future, maybe on Linux. I didn't spend that much time on that game, because it wasn't very playable, but as I said, it is likely fixable. Sticking with racing games, raceroom ran alright, but the performance display was quite off, as there was no way the game ran that well, even with the best modern computer. It was sort of playable, but quite blurry, so I won't dwell on this one either. Alien Isolation ran with a very low resolution and the menus were nearly impossible to navigate. Once in-game, it was quite blurry, but the performance was actually quite good. I have never finished this game, and I do not know how much it relies on text, but I would call this one playable. Subnautica is where it starts getting interesting, as this is the first game I noticed there was an issue with performance and that the card was actually better than I thought. The first time I ran the game, it was surprisingly smooth and playable, but all subsequent launches had an issue with performance, so even the recording had a lower frame rate than the first boot. I sort of ignored the issue and tried getting a decent recording, but I did notice the discrepancies between the overlay and what I was getting, the overlay being closer to the original frame rate. Payday 2 runs surprisingly well, even at a higher resolution than the other games. It hit and even surpassed the target of 72 FPS. Both stealth and loud with a bunch of action ran fairly well, and overall the game was quite playable. Minecraft 1.20 with the Vivecraft mod had some rendering issues due to mod not being complete at the time for that version of the game. But despite that, other than the overlay bug, the game ran fairly well, although there were some slowdowns, likely due to the CPU encoding. And finally, Beat Saber. New versions have changed the way the game renders, and it now struggles on other graphics cards, where the game only renders in one eye or even just a black screen. However, there is a mod that fixes that, and once in game, it works great. The game is very playable with no slowdowns. I have tested another game with the exact same issue that I know is now very fixable, but the devs hate mods for some strange reasons, so I have not gotten to test that game, despite this issue being the exact same as Beat Saber. Overall, I was quite surprised that I could play anything in VR using that GPU. Between its age, lack of support, and 1GB of RAM, it did very well. As I mentioned multiple times, there was an issue where any kind of overlay, including Steam's, will tank the frame rate, but this is likely a fixable issue, and Linux also exists. And I'll probably test this card's VR performance on there next.